We're outside Pineville, Oregon, about to begin a Land Rover expedition through beautiful Central Oregon.
Now, expedition travel is a great way to get off the beaten path and really get out to enjoy the sights like a location like the Oregon High Desert has to offer.
The challenge, however, is having the trucks, supplies, and gear necessary for this kind of remote travel.
I'm Jack W. Peters.
I'm Tara Nagelhout.
This is Expedition Central Oregon. Come along on our journey through beautiful Central Oregon. On this trip, we're going to learn the basics of expedition travel. From trip planning, navigation, off-road driving, communications, how to get unstuck, even what to do if you get lost.
Hi there, I'm Buzz Chandler, your leader for the trip for the next 3 days, and just want to welcome you all here. I want to go over some points about how we're going to behave as a group when we're on the road. We've got quite a herd today. Probably what we're going to do once we get to the buttes is break the group up into 2 sections. So there will be a sub leader and 2 other sweep vehicles so that we can go in about, looks like 9 trucks each. That'll make it a lot easier on the trail. The first thing is sort of the cardinal rule here is that when we're out on the trail or a highway or anything and you're making a turn off the main trail or it comes to a Y, wait there until the truck behind you can see you and see which direction you're going. That way we won't get anybody lost. So just make it a cardinal rule that you don't move until you see the truck coming up behind you. So there's plenty of room out where we're going. Stretch it out, you'll have fun, and everybody just have a good, safe, fun time driving. This run here, it has something for everybody. If you've been off-roading for a long time or if this is one of your first times, you're going to learn a lot. It's a lot of fun. We've got some great places to camp. Why don't we just go ahead and mount up, and we're going to head this way. We're going to go to Brothers, Oregon on Highway 20, and if you want to take a quick look at the maps, we got them right here so you get a mental image. Thanks a lot.
Before we can go on a trip like this, there's definitely some planning to do. When it comes to travel planning, once you decide where you want to go, you have to consider the special conditions and the gear that's required for that location. Really, the best way to travel in remote areas is exactly what we're doing here. We're going with a group of people that have done the similar trip or the same trip. They know where they're going and they know what to bring. That's really the best way to do this thing. And then when you're preparing to go, make sure you use a list. Talk with others to make sure you're bringing the right gear, not too much, and make a list and stick with it so you're not going to forget anything, because there's not too many quick marks out here to drop in and get something you might have left behind. So remember, if you need something, make sure you bring it with you.
Last but not least, use a travel itinerary. Let somebody know where you're going and when you're expected to return. In the event that you get lost or something goes wrong, this information can save valuable time for somebody to come and find you. We're on the first leg of our trip in the Glass Buttes Cinder Cones.
And this is really quite a unique area, because as you're driving through here, you see sheets of what appears to be broken glass. And it actually is obsidian. Now, ancient tribes up and down the West Coast came to this area of Oregon to get their obsidian. And this particular glass has been found in archaeological digs as far east as Ohio. Once we've determined where we want to go, it's time to make sure that our vehicle is up to the challenge. We are at our first base camp, and we are currently on the southeast side of the Blast Cinder Cone Butte area, and we're setting up camp for the night. But before we set up our tent, we're going to go for a little off-road excursion. The first thing you want to do when you go off-roading or when you get back from trail riding like we've been doing this afternoon is you want to do a quick inspection on the truck. That kind of banging around out here is awful difficult on all the mechanics and the vehicles, and so we just want to make sure everything's tight before we head out again. We take a look around the truck, make sure the tires got air in them. We have a look underneath the truck, make sure we're not dripping anything, nothing's leaking, we're not overheating, anything like that. Come around to the engine, pop the hood, have a look at everything, make sure we got brake fluid, power steering fluid, check the oil, check the antifreeze, and then also make sure there's plenty of washer fluid, make sure everything else looks good with no strange looking leaks or problems. One of the real important off-road tips is airing down your tires. Now, when you let a little air out of the tires, it really softens the ride, especially for the rough, rocky trail we just drove down. What it does is it flattens the tire a little bit, and it widens the tire's footprint, both the width and the length, which actually gives the tire more bite and more traction just about any kind of terrain, from snow to sand to mud. Even if you find yourself stuck, letting some air out of the tires is a good way to go to get you going again. Now, typically a tire like this might run about 38 pounds, something like that. And on a trail like this, with the weight that we're carrying, we'll probably knock it down maybe to 30 pounds, maybe 28 pounds. But we can run as low as 10 pounds or less, as long as you don't turn so sharp you roll the tire off the bead, just depending on what kind of terrain you're in. Now, we're with Chad Dannon today and his daughter Brooke, and they're very nice Defender 90, and he's going to show us a couple ways to air down the tires so it can be done quickly and consistently. There's a couple gauge systems here that are used, and I'll let you tell us about the other special equipment that you have.
Well, I bought these Ston air down tools, and basically all you do is you preset what pressure you want on your tire, and it has a little set gauge here, and then you simply screw it into the valve and it releases the air. I've already got this one set, so it's not releasing any air. But if the tire had more pressure in it, there we go, then it'll take it down to approximately 18 pounds is what I have this one set at. So then you can stop it by pushing it in, or you can proceed.
So that's pretty slick. You can just simply walk around your truck, plug those in, and you got 18 pounds of pressure exactly on all 4 tires.
That's correct.
Yep. Now the tricky part is getting the air back in. Now, do you have an onboard air compressor?
Yes, I do.
Yep. The air lockers require air pressure, and it's a good idea to put a fitting on it so you can always air back up before you hit the highway again. Before going anywhere, make sure your truck is up for the trip. Maintenance is critical to make sure it's going to be as dependable as possible. If you're not up for doing your own maintenance properly, make sure you have someone else competent do it for you and give it a good inspection before you ever hit the trail. Vehicles include a number of somewhat complicated and potentially fragile systems. Besides the engine and the drivetrain, there's the tires and the cooling system, the electrical system, and the brakes and suspension. All these systems have to be working absolutely properly before you ever take them out to this area.
Know your truck's limits. A stock truck can do well if driven and cared for properly. But Expedition trucks, well, they're more built than bought. Common aftermarket improvements include a suspension lift, oversized tires, high lift jack, driving lights, and a high-performance air filter.
Now, speaking of oversized tires, you also need a spare tire that's the same size as the rest of your tires, as well as a good lug wrench and a jack that'll lift your vehicle up high enough to get it out of the sand and the mud to change the tire. You also need a good tool kit that is adequate for basic repairs. Another good idea is to go ahead and change your tune-up parts out before they need to be, and that way you can carry the spares on board, like a fuel filter, spare fan belts, and extra cap and rotor.
Well, here's our toolkit. Besides fuses and relays, don't forget the good old repair parts like wire, cable ties, duct tape, and WD-40. And of course, don't go on a trip without a very good first aid kit.
Hey, Jack here up on the roof, and this is my son Eric down here.
Hi.
You know we have to have extra fuel on these trips, but it can be a messy job getting the fuel from the tank up on the roof to the gas tank down there. So I'm going to have my son help demonstrate a new siphon hose.
Hey Dad, what's a siphon hose?
Well, it's a hose that's used to transfer fuel from one spot to the other. In the old days, you'd have to actually draw on this end with your mouth, which it tastes terrible to get gasoline in your mouth. But this is a new hose that will do that nasty job for us. I'll show you. Now, would you go ahead and take the gas cap off for us? And then the other tip is that when you're taking the lid off of a gas can up at elevation, it can be pressurized, which means it can spit at you. So you want to take off the lid real slowly and see the pressure just pop off there. If you do it quick, it can kick fuel back at you. So Eric, I'm going to have you go ahead and just put that into the gas tank for me. And just hold it like that. And then I'm going to start. Okay, and then just step off to the side a little bit so we can see that going in. Yeah, there it goes. Just a few little beats there with the end of this hose, and the fuel is running. And there's a little, like a ball bearing at the end of this brass fitting that helps us draw the fuel right through there. This is a really nice system. You don't have to try to lift a heavy fuel can off the roof. The only real challenging part is I have two of these. One is for fuel and one is for water. And the trick is not to get them mixed up, because if you do, your coffee tastes terrible.
We're here on the Discovery Trail Glass Buttes trip for the Pacific Coast Rover Club. I'm Buzz Chandler, the team sort of leader. And this is a great trip that we do every year. Part of the route is on the Backcountry Discovery Trail that runs from the California border to the Washington border. Some of it's very primitive trail, and we started out yesterday on the Glass Buttes and climbed to 6,000 feet at the top of the buttes, came back down, camped overnight on the shoulder. Today we've been running across some ancient lava fields, dry lake beds, and high desert where we're going on very, very primitive roads. Some of them were originally wagon trails. And it's sort of what we call a rock and roll event, because a lot of embedded rocks in the trail. You get bounced all over. You've got to have a truck that's really trail ready. But this is a good trip with a lot of people along, where people who are experienced off-road and those who are going for the first time can work together. They all learn. I've been doing this trip many times, and I learn something new every time I go on it.
We're at Green Mountain, about to begin our second evening of camping. Now, last night I slept on the ground in a tent and I froze. And I started looking around the campsite wondering, what is on top of all those cars? And up here we have John.
Hi there.
Hi, John.
Come on up.
Tell us about your tent, because it's a little different than what we had.
These things are great. In fact, I sleep better in these than I do in my own bed at home. Well, underneath there are two bars that fold down for the tent. There's 3 U-bolts that go through. You can put them on a commercial rack, or you can put them on a rooftop rack like this. You can put them on a pickup, a Jeep, or any other kind of light utility vehicle. And they're very versatile, mount easy, come off easy, so easy on, easy off.
And I'll tell you, it is a lot more comfortable than where I slept last night. So I'm hoping that John will trade with me and he can sleep on the ground and I'll sleep up here where it's nice and safe.
Navigation is a major part of expedition travel. We're going to take a look at using high-tech satellite-based GPS, as well as the traditional methods of using a map and compass. Got to have maps no matter what, and as you know, maps come in all shapes and sizes. Our glove box might be full of maps like this that are road maps that may be like 1 to 500 scale. They're good for traveling and finding cities and freeways and so forth. And then there's also various Forest Service maps and specialty maps for certain areas, especially vacation areas and popular hiking areas and so forth. But when it's really time to get down to business, you really need a detailed map. This map is very detailed. It's 1 to 24,000 in scale. It's only about 55 square miles, so it doesn't cover a lot of ground, but that's okay. These maps are full of contour lines, and in this case, every contour line is about 20 feet apart, so that gives an idea of what the elevation is. Essentially what it does when you look at it, it gives a 3D perspective to the ground. So you can look and see, oh, here's a mountain, and here's a hill, and here's a valley, and here's a river. It's just very, very detailed, and it's full of symbols and so forth to help you find your way around pretty well. But as we look at the body of the map, we also have to remember to look around the edges in the bottom. Now, the bottom of the map here is called the collar, and this is where a lot of information is. And we're going to look at this to find a couple of important pieces, especially when we're using a GPS receiver and a compass. One is the scale, the distance in miles and so forth. The other is when this particular map was made. Now, this map was made in 1976, and it was updated in 1983. Now, that's very, very typical. And you may notice that if you're using a map, you may see something on a map, but when you get out to the ground, it doesn't look the same. There could almost be a freeway where there was just only a small road, or maybe a trail or something is no longer there, or something has changed. Well, it's because these maps may be 20 or 30 years old. So they're more of a guide than they are the gospel, but you definitely need one no matter what. The other issue too is magnetic declination. That's the difference between true north and magnetic north. And in Oregon, for example, it's 18 degrees east, and 18 degrees is a considerable difference. So when we're using a compass, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, we want to make sure that our compass is set to compensate for that so we can take a true north reading, even though the compass will tell us it's actually 18 degrees off to the east in this case. Let's get out our compass and have some fun with that. Now, compass is a real simple tool, and it's a lot of fun to learn how to use. And those of you that may have been in Boy Scouts or something a long time ago, it might be a little fuzzy. It's one of those things that you just have to practice every once in a while. It's easy to forget how to use it, but it is quite simple. Essentially, on this particular compass, there's a pointer arrow up here. Here's the bezel. Here is the red housing, and here is the needle. And if we want to take a compass bearing, what we do is we point the front of the compass to our target. In this case, I'm going to shoot it right on the sun, and I'm going to line up the red needle into the red housing, put the red in the shed as a way to remember that. And what do you know? That sunrise is exactly 95 degrees to the east. Now that's shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because we still have to remember the basics. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. So essentially that's how we shoot a bearing. We're going to line everything up and we're going to aim at our target. And we take a couple measurements here and we can get the right bearing. So a true north bearing on this is 95 degrees east. The other thing we can do then is write that down, and then once we get to a certain target, like maybe a tree or a mountain or some other landmark, we may take another bearing to another location, and then another bearing to another location. We write all those down, and so then when it's time to turn around and come home, we just reverse those bearings. One of the benefits of learning how to use a compass is to be able to set your map and use terrain association. What I mean is, for instance, we take a bearing on north, and in this case, it's right in that direction. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll move our map so it faces the correct direction so we can start lining up features on the map that we see out here. As an example, we know we're on a mountain now, and we can see the mountains off into the distance. We can find those on the map.
On expedition travel, both low-tech and high-tech methods are used to make sure we're going the right direction. Each leg of the trip is laid out using a good map, and then satellite-based GPS receivers are used to make sure we're still on track. One of the primary functions of a GPS is saving waypoints. Before we can save a waypoint, we have to make sure we have good satellite reception. And on here, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 satellites. So it's pretty good, and we can save a waypoint now. You can also enter a waypoint manually. For example, if somebody calls you from a radio and says, my coordinates are, you can type those in just by the numbers, tell your GPS to go to, and it will give you exact directions on how to get to the rest of your party.
Now, using a GPS receiver is really ideal for this kind of travel. As you can see our screen here, there's a little dotted line here, actually a couple different dotted lines, and that is called a track log. That is electronic breadcrumb trail. And what it does is it records where we've been, and that really helps us to keep from getting lost. We're with Todd Eliason, who's a communications specialist. In fact, he's a command officer with Mountain Wave, a communication organization for search and rescue efforts in Oregon. Hi, Todd. He's going to show us some unique things we can do with GPS.
So in this case, you can see that our location is highlighted on the USGS quad. That's the most detailed map that you can get. The software already has all of that loaded in, so we can see our exact position at the campground here on Green Mountain.
Another really unique thing you can do with GPS is combine amateur radio and mapping programs to actually track other vehicles and allow other people to track you. This is called APRS, which stands for Automatic Position Reporting System. And how this works is essentially the GPS coordinates are digitized and rebroadcast through an amateur radio.
What I do is I broadcast out my location, and then they broadcast back their location. I can see their location on my GPS, just as they can see my location on their GPS. Here you can see we've got Green Mountain Camp, we've got K7 EUG, which is another one of our vehicles, and KD7 TRX, which is a third vehicle in the group. The benefit of this, especially in a group this large, is we can see miles ahead where vehicles are, and if somebody takes a wrong turn, we can see where they're going, we can correct it and get them back with the rest of the group very easily.
Here's another important tip when you're navigating with a group. You have to make sure you're all speaking the same navigational language, and I'll tell you what I mean. There's a couple different ways to read GPS coordinates. You can read them in latitude and longitude, which is degrees, minutes, and seconds. But there's another way to read those same coordinates, and that's by degrees and decibel minutes. There's also a third system which is used, which is the UTM metric system based on kilometers and meters, and that's going to give a completely different coordinate reading. The other issue too, when using a compass, you can use either true north or magnetic north. Now, it really doesn't make any difference whether your group uses true or magnetic or latitude and longitude or UTM or degrees, minutes, and seconds or degrees and decibel minutes. You just have to agree that you're all going to use the same system. So when you're using the radio and you're passing coordinates and so forth or providing compass degrees, you're providing accurate information. Imagine a pine forest in the middle of the desert. This is Oregon's Lost Forest. Now, this forest is a gateway to another unique geological site, 9 miles of flowing sand dunes from the eruption of Crater Lake. It looks more like the Sahara than a location in Oregon, but what a great place to experience. Now that we know where we're going, it's time to take a look at how we can keep in contact with our group as well as the outside world. Good morning and welcome to my classroom. You've seen us use radios a lot on this trip, so I want to talk a little bit more about communications. Now, in the old days, a lot of people use CB radios, and they're still valuable, but the problem is the range is very limited. And these family radio service radios are also very popular. They work great for keeping in contact with everyone around the campground, or if you're traveling in a row or a convoy like we've been doing, they do a good job of keeping in touch with everybody. But as you've seen on this trip, we like using amateur radios. We're using VHF FM amateur radios like this 5-watt handheld. These have just a number of advantages, mainly because they're so much more powerful. The signal travels better, which just allows better communication. And the radios in our trucks are 50 watts, so they'll operate just about as far as we can see on a line-of-sight basis. Now, in some areas, we need to make a jump even beyond amateur radio. Not that you couldn't rig up a radio to work even further, because you can, even on a mobile basis, but there's a couple other possibilities. One is a satellite phone. Now, a satellite phone works a lot like a regular cellular phone, except relying on ground-based towers. It operates off a satellite in the sky, so it's not limited, and that can be used anywhere in the world. Now, another device that has come along recently is a personal locator beacon. Aircraft and ships carry emergency locator beacons. In the event of emergency, the Coast Guard or whatever emergency agency can find them. We now have that advantage to have that same sort of safety for hiking and wilderness travel. With the basics out of the way, it's time to get down to the business of off-road driving. One of the things about four-wheel drive vehicles is they have a dirty little secret. Actually, a four-wheel drive vehicle is only a two-wheel drive vehicle, meaning with open differentials, only one wheel drives the vehicle at any time. On a normal vehicle and normal driving operations, that's either just one wheel in the front or the back of the vehicle. When you shift into four-wheel drive, what that does is it allows the wheel to drive in both the front of the vehicle and the rear of the vehicle, but not both wheels in the front and the back. So actually, a four-wheel drive, unless you have a locking mechanism that locks up all four tires, is only a two-wheel drive vehicle, and you have to keep that in mind. Now, what makes matters worse is the wheel that gets the power is the wheel that has the least resistance. That means if you get bogged down in the sand or the mud, and one wheel's bogged down and the other one can spin, that's the wheel that gets the power. So you really have to be aware when you're driving that just because you have four-wheel drive doesn't mean you're never going to get stuck, because you certainly can get stuck. And luckily though, there's a few driving techniques that are real simple that allow you to make it through a lot of obstacles without having to worry about that. Now the other thing is with four-wheel drive vehicles is they have a low range and a high range. Usually the high range isn't much different than your normal transmission gearing. And that works best for snow or a hard-packed road without any hills or any obstacles. But for this kind of terrain where we've got lots of switchbacks, steep uphills and downhill areas and so forth, the best thing to do is to go ahead and put your transfer case into low range. That way, if you need the extra power, you have it. And that's important because if you're driving around on a reasonably flat hill like this, and all of a sudden you come up to a hill, you don't want to break your momentum to go ahead and shift into low range. You already want to be there. It just makes off-road driving a lot smoother that way. And like we're coming into some rough areas here, you want to go real easy on the steering. If you steer and jerk back and forth, it's easy to spin out of control or really have a problem. Same thing with braking. You want to go easy on the braking. If you have to slow down, let off on the gas and let the engine compression do that for you and slow down before you see an obstacle instead of coming up quick and putting on the brakes. And what you want to do is pick your line. That means what is the best line to go on for the smoothest drive. That could be up out of the tire grooves like we are right now, or it may mean falling down into the tire grooves, depending on rocks, obstacles, washouts, whatever we might run into along the way. One of the things when it comes to hill climbs is that you probably don't have time to shift once you enter a hill. So you have to pick the gear you want to be in and just hope you pick the right one and just give enough motor smooth and easy to get right up that hill. And then if it's a steep hill, you want to back off once you get to the top to make sure you don't launch off the other side or you're not going down a cliff or something really steep. And then same thing when you're going downhill, keep off the brakes and just shift into low and allow the compression of your motor to slow your vehicle down for you. And that way you can safely go down steep hills without wearing out your brakes or overheating your brakes. You just let the engine do the work for you, nice and smooth. Now another issue with this kind of driving is ground clearance. You really have to be aware of what's underneath your vehicle. Usually the lowest point of your vehicle is the differentials on the front and rear axle. Okay, now here's an example of an obstacle. This is a classic looking road where winter floods have washed the road out and cut a ditch down the middle of it. And there's a proper way to drive through these types of areas to keep you from slamming the front end into the ground. What we're going to do is take off here nice and easy, and we're going to drop into this ditch one wheel at a time. Instead of hitting it head on, we put one tire in at a time, and we can just go right through there with no problems. Off-road driving means eventually getting stuck. Let's take a look at vehicle recovery. If you go off-roading long enough, sooner or later you're going to get stuck. And you'll know it when you do. It's that sinking feeling when you're sinking and your tires are spinning but you're not moving. It's a terrible situation, but it's not the end of the world. There's plenty of ways to prevent from getting stuck, and there's also plenty of things to do once you get stuck to get out of that situation. The first thing really is prevention. Make sure your vehicle's in four-wheel drive before you need it, and also make sure you've got enough momentum and speed going to get through obstacles to keep from getting stuck. And if you think you're getting into a technical area, use a spotter. Or if you're looking at mud or water or sand and you're not sure how deep it is, test it first before you drive through it. Once your vehicle's stuck, there's some real simple things you can do to get it out. One is simply rock it back and forth. Kick your passenger out and put him in the back, and put it in forward, low range, reverse low range, forward, back and forth, and get that truck rocking back and forth this way, and often that momentum will get you up and out of the obstacle. That's a real simple way. Another way is reduce your air pressure in your tires maybe down to 15, 10 pounds, something like that. Get those tires really flat and wide, and they'll help give you a lot of extra bite to maybe work your way out. Another common way is using a high lift jack. Now this jack is tall enough that we can hook it up on the bumper, and if our back tires are sunk in the mud or sand, say, we can jack this bumper up and we can start finding rocks and debris and wood and even dirt and pack it underneath those tires and then let the vehicle back down. Now that's also important if you become high-centered. Say we roll up on a deep rut or a large boulder or something like that, and something's hung up on the frame rails so our wheels are spinning. We just have to have a jack tall enough to get this thing off the ground, get something underneath those wheels so we can get up and over the obstacle. This is a large jack to pack around, but you're not going to do that kind of work with a small bottle jack or scissor jack that may come with your truck. We also need some gear. If things get more serious than that and we still can't get out, what we're going to do is we're going to use a tow strap to see if we can get a pull. This, for example, is a heavy-duty tow strap. This is 3 inches wide and it's got large loop ends, and this is about 30 feet long. This works great. As an example, if I was stuck, what I could do, I have a recovery point here that's designed just for a tow strap. Put my smaller pin back in, and that is a solid pull point. Never ever put a tow strap or a winch cable on a hitch ball. Hitch balls are not designed for that kind of pressure. If they come off, you've just launched a 2-inch cannonball. So now we've got a situation where rocking the vehicle doesn't help, jacking it up doesn't help. Looks like a more serious stuck. It looks like we're going to have to call for some help, and I'm going to do that. We're going to meet Tim Goldsmith. Tim,
hey.
Thanks for your help on this project. Now, Tim is a really good sport because he is our token Toyota Land Cruiser guy on this Land Rover Expedition. And he's been off-roading long enough that he's probably got stuck a few times himself, and he's probably also helped a few other people get out. Am I right?
Right.
Indeed. So what we're going to do in this situation is we're going to go ahead and use a winch. And these tools are very effective, and they work very well for this kind of an application, especially if you're really in the middle of nowhere, because it's kind of difficult to call for a tow truck or something like that. But because we're dealing with rope and a whole lot of power, they are potentially dangerous. And if anyone's going to get hurt around recovery, this is one of the areas it could be. So we want to make sure that it's done right and done safe.
Okay, well, the first thing we need to do to operate the winch is glove up. And then we need to pull out the line.
So Tim's going to free spool this cable and I'm going to run it out. I'm going to go ahead and use my pull point.
One of the other steps about doing this is securing the line with some kind of blanket or a coat, anything to lay over the line in case it snaps. You have a way of dampening the shock of the line coming up. That's just another safety precaution.
And this also leads us to another typical problem, is that we are on the wrong side of the winch line. Now Tim needs to get around into the cab of his truck to operate this winch, and it's best never to walk over the line. Even when it's loose like this, if the line breaks loose or the truck breaks loose, it will go taut and cause a real problem. Now, what we're going to do is Tim's going to go ahead and operate this winch inside his vehicle, and that's the safest way of doing it, because in the event this line breaks, he's protected by his front windshield, and he can operate everything from right there with his remote control. So now the challenge is communication. He can't see the spool here, and you can't let too much line in too quickly, or it may make the spool go haywire. So then what Tim and I have to do is use good communication when we operate that winch, which is usually challenging because engines may be running and there's noise and so forth. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and clear everybody out of the way, and there's going to be one person in charge of spotting this, and I'm going to give directions then to Tim to go ahead and operate that winch. Stop. Okay? And then if we just wanted to have him pull a little bit more, I'd give him this symbol. Okay, stop. Okay, and we need a little slack in the line, so go ahead and just take a little bit out. Little bit out. Stop. Even if you can't hear me, those symbols of bring the cable in, stop, just a touch, bring the cable out. That simple. Now the recovery we just did works great if you had the luxury for a straight-on pull. But often in an off-road environment, you do not have that luxury. Often, and like in this situation, we have our vehicle in this direction without room to pull from this side. So what we're going to do is go ahead and use a snatch block, which is a large pulley, and our D-shackle, and then a tree protector to go ahead and do a extreme angle recovery. So just like we did before, I'm going to go ahead and give Tim hand signals to go ahead and pull my truck free. But again, a few safety measures. Again, do not step over this line, and do not ever get inside this line, because if this gear breaks away, that line is going to give and sweep anything out that's inside of it. So again, we've cleared everybody out of the way. Tim is ready. We have a driver in this vehicle that's going to go ahead and assist, and we're going to go ahead and recover this vehicle. So here we go. Stop. Excellent. That did the trick. We have successfully recovered the vehicle again, and so now it's time to go ahead and take in the winch cable. And there's a method to this as well. You can't just reel it in, otherwise it's going to go haywire on that spool. So someone has to help it go in and make sure there's enough pressure on it so it's wound evenly and tightly on that spool. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and take it in. I'm going to pass this cable hand over hand, never letting it slide through my fingers. Hand over hand. I'm also not getting my fingers anywhere near that head. I'm going to stay at least 4 feet back. Keep going. I'm going to show the driver the end so he doesn't keep going, and we're just going to go ahead and touch it in. Stop. Okay. Needless to say, I don't have to say what it would be like to get our fingers or gloves caught in there, so don't get anywhere near there. Keep at least 4 feet distance, and make sure when you're passing that cable, it's hand over hand, and don't let it slide through your gloves. As you can see, you can recover a vehicle pretty quickly and effectively. The idea is just make a plan first and do it safely. There's nothing worse than becoming lost, and it can happen easier than you might think. Here's some tips to avoid from becoming stranded. We are in the lost forest, and I thought that would be a great time to talk about being lost and staying found. Now, I'm with Search and Rescue Specialist John Miller. John, thanks for joining us.
Jack?
Now, John, how long have you been trying to find lost people?
Well, I've been working on this for, I think it's going on 20, 25 years now.
I know you've been doing that for a long time. You've been up a lot of late nights trying to find people. And it happens to the best of us. Even if your sense of direction is good, it's still a possibility. And John's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but if you find yourself lost, the best thing to do is to see if you can backtrack the best you can over familiar territory. If you just get to the point where you're absolutely lost, the best thing to do is to absolutely stay put in a location where you can be found, because eventually search and rescue will come out and try to find you. If your vehicle becomes stranded or broken down, most experts agree to definitely stay with your vehicle in most cases. The reason why is because your vehicle provides a place of shelter, as well as making it much more visible and much more easier for you to be found. So John, if we're out in a nice location like this, obviously we've got a lot of gear in our trucks already, but if we're going to go for a hike, we're going to take some gear with us, aren't we?
You're absolutely right, Jack. And I happen to have with me my little 10 essentials bag, and it's obvious that the smaller the container that holds the essentials, the more likely you're going to be carrying that thing with you. And the whole point is to have it with you all the time. Have a little bit of shelter, a little bit of warmth in here, and you can last many, many days out there. Carry a whistle for signaling, and you're pretty well set. I've got matches and everything I need, and this thing can go on a little day pack and take care of me for several days.
Sure. And that's going to include things like a compass and probably some first aid essentials, right?
That's correct. A compass, a plastic bag to build a shelter out of, some candle ends to make a fire with, and just the minimal stuff, because you take too much, you're probably not going to take.
Leave it in the car, right? And a lot of this stuff can be used for multiple things. Like, for instance, the plastic bag can be a poncho if you get caught in a rainstorm, right?
Yeah, and it can also be used to clean up the environment around us, so it's a little nicer than when we found it.
Show us one of the most important essentials in there, mountain money.
Well, yeah, that's my 11th essential, and you know, the mountain money or the toilet paper is something that makes an outdoor adventure all the more pleasurable.
And also used for first aid and other applications. And beyond the 10 essentials, some of the other things that are good to have is a GPS receiver, and definitely a way to communicate. Your cell phone may not work, so a good radio or something like that we talked about before. Taking an expedition through a foreign country requires some special planning. Let's hear from travel expert Buzz Chandler. Now I'm back with Buzz Chandler, international traveler, and we're having a great time on this trip through Oregon. But it's a big world out there and there's a lot of neat places to explore, and I think it would be great to do an expedition like this in another part of the world, like maybe Baja, Mexico, or Africa, or across Australia, something like that. But there's a lot of special considerations for international travel. For example, do you need a passport? Can you take your dog? Can you take a firearm? Who would you contact in the event of a legal issue or a medical emergency? I'm betting that, Buzz, you might have some tips for some international travel.
Yeah, I've got several. First thing, you're going to have a current passport, and the more third world the country, probably a visa that you have to get before you leave the U.S. So you'd have to contact that country's consulate or embassy in the United States, and there's services here that can do it for you. Like there's one company in Washington, D.C. called Travel Document Systems. They're very good. Second thing, leave your firearms at home. There's a lot of countries where a private person is not allowed to have them, period. If you had a firearm on you and you reach the border, you're probably going to see the Crossbar Hotel there real fast.
Especially Mexico.
Yes. Taking a pet. You can take your dog in places, but be aware that many countries require a 6-week to a 6-month quarantine for rabies, even if you can produce all the papers. So best to leave your pets at home. And finally, the other thing that you have to do that trips up a lot of people is if you're taking a vehicle and you're shipping it by container or something like this, you're going to say go from Morocco to Algeria, across the Sahara, something like that, or through South America, you have to have what's called a carnet, C-A-R-N-E-T. It's like a customs bond, and what that does is that you can cross the borders, because many countries, when you bring a vehicle in, a private vehicle, they will assess the local taxation on that vehicle as if you were importing it, which can be as high as 200%. And they'll stamp your passport. So you've got to have that carnet, and when you leave the country, have the customs official stamp your passport, look at the carnet, take it off, or else the bonding company that puts the carnet out is going to be paying that to the country where you were, and then they're going to come back after you for payment for the sale of the car in the country, even though a customs official may have just forgotten to stamp it.
Day 3, we're about to check out the Derrick Ice Caves.
It looks a little like a trek to the center of the earth as we hike more than a quarter mile underground. Now, the Derrick Ice Cave is an ancient lava tube, and dropping into the cavern feels a little like walking into a freezer with a rush of frigid air. This is from ice formations at the back of the cave.
That was cool. We're on the last leg of our trip at the top of Pine Mountain with an elevation of about 6,200 feet. This has been a great way to travel. We've covered a lot of ground and we've seen some scenery you just can't see from the highway or even a campground.
We hope you've enjoyed our expedition and learned a few things along the way. As you can see, just about anyone can enjoy this kind of travel. The key is to definitely plan ahead, know where you're going, and bring the right gear.
Sure, and the payoff is that you'll enjoy the outdoors and the camaraderie that comes with this kind of group travel. You're sure to make memories that last an entire lifetime.
This is Jack and Tara. Thank you for watching Expedition Central Oregon.